That's Hashem. Today's daf is Masechta Zevachim Daf Beis. Be'ezus Hashem, we start the Seder Kachim, and we should all be able to do it, understand it, and learn it, and finish it Gesundheit. Okay, so the Mishnah begins. The Mishnah on over here. Let's just even without even any introduction, just go over one basic point. There's something called Kachi Kachim, the Holy of Holies, and sacrifices which are called kache kalim, which are lighter in holiness. And the difference is, so the kache kachim would be, an example would be a carbon oila, which is like, say, a sheep. A guy makes a donation that he wants to bring a sheep onto the mizbeach. So that's kache kachim because it's totally burned on the mizbeach. Nothing belongs to, no one can eat any part of that carbon. And then we have also what's, let's say, carbon chatas. Person sinned, let's say he was machal al Shabbos, so he brings a carbon chatas. So then he doesn't get anything of that carbon. After they bring the parts that go on the mizbeach, the kohen, kahanim eat it in the Beis Hamikdash. And those are two perfect examples of kache kachim, holy karbonos. Then there's something called like a shlomim, a lighter carbon, a shlomim or carbon pesach, where you bring it onto the mizbeach, and then the owners can take it home, like the carbon pesach you take to your family and eat it by the Seder night. Or shlomim, you would eat it in Yerushalayim, obviously, and you have a su'uda with your friends. So that's the basic what you need to know. So now the Gemara the Mishnah starts off. Now there are four major things that when you slaughter an animal, there are four major services in the Beis Hamikdash regarding an animal. One, slaughtering the animal. Two, catching the blood once it pours out of its neck. The third thing is you carry the blood in a vessel towards the mizbeach, and then zrika, you sprinkle it onto the mizbeach, the blood on the mizbeach. So the Mishnah begins, Kol hazavachim shnizbechu shloi l'shemon. You have a carbon. Let's say a guy made a donation of a carbon oila. He comes to the kohen, and on purpose, let's say the kohen is the sheichet, shechts it for a shlomim. The kohen wanted to mess over the donor. So the Mishnah says, kisherim, that carbon is kosher. And what that means is that you should continue to correct yourself. So if you slaughtered it for a shlomim, then when you catch the blood, think about oila. When you bring it to the mizbeach, think about oila. Continue doing it right. Okay, so even though he messed up in a service, but the animal is still kosher, you don't throw it out, but you continue the other services. The continued service should be done correctly. Ella, but the problem is, Shaloi Olu Bailam L'Shem Chayva. The Mishnah says that the owner has to bring a new carbon oila, because in one of the services, the kohen was thinking the wrong carbon, and therefore the owner was not yoytze his obligation. He made a vow that he's going to bring a carbon oila, so now he has to bring a new carbon oila. The exception over here is min ha-pesach. Let's say a guy, Erev Pesach in the afternoon, comes to the Beis Hamikdash with his sheep or goat and slaughters it and has it slaughtered. But the kohen was thinking, instead of a carbon Pesach, he was thinking or said that I'm shechting it as if it's an oila. Or v'hachatas. The chatas is an animal. You brought it because the person was machal Shabbos. And instead of thinking carbon chatas, the person slaughtered it and started thinking carbon oila. Or maybe let's say he verbally expressed that it's carbon oila. So then we're going to learn that that's the exception. That means once that happens, you throw the whole animal out. Don't continue this service. Don't continue at all the service. Ha-pesach bizmanoi, v'achatas b'chol zman. The pesach can be invalidated only when you shechting the carbon pesach in the afternoon on Erev Pesach. because that's when this animal is supposed to be brought as a carbon pesach. And if the kohen thought of another that it's a shlamim, or he thinks that it's an oila, that's when he invalidates the carbon pesach. Va'achatas b'chozman, and a chatas could be invalidated anytime a person brings it, because a chatas has no time set when you can bring it. You can bring it on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it doesn't matter. If the kohen thought another that it's another carbon, so let's say when he was slaughtering it, he thinks oila, so then the chatas is invalidated and you don't continue at all. You throw the whole animal in the garbage. Rab Leza says, Afa Osham. You see, the Tanakama felt an Osham is like a regular carbon, and therefore you can continue bringing it. It's still a kosher carbon. Rabbi Leza adds, even a Osham is the same as a Chatas and a Pesach Bismane, Bechatas, Osham Becholzman. All these things, according to Rabbi Eliezer, can be invalidated, and you don't continue the service. You don't continue the service. You stop, and you have to dispose of the animal. Omar Rabbi Leza explained himself, because why is chatas equal to an asham? Why is an asham equal to a chatas? So Rabbi Leza said, in reference to the chachamim, hachatas ba'alachet. Why does a person most of the time bring the carbon chatas? Because he did a sin. And usually you bring a carbon asham also because a person did an avera. Let's say he was moil behegdish or something like that. He violated stealing something that belonged to the Beis Hamikdash. So you bring a carbon asham. So it also becomes most of the times because of a sin. Just like a chatas is right away invalidated as soon as you do it not for its for the right intention. So afa asham, so also the carbon asham, pasal shalai lishmai, it will also be invalidated as soon as you think of the wrong carbon. If you have an asham over here and the kohen shechts it for an oila, the carbon is invalidated. Says the Mishnah. Another opinion. We learned that the Tanakama said that any carbon, let's say a carbon oila, you shechted it for shlamim, so then you continue the services as a carbon oila. It's still valid, but the bailim wasn't yotzei chiyuv. Okay, but it's still a valid carbon. But Yosef and Yochanan and Omya, it's not so fast. If, let's say, the person who is slaughtering the carbon oila started saying, "Oh, I'm making this into a carbon pesach," or "I'm making this into a carbon chatas," he invalidates it. Just like a carbon chatas itself can be invalidated, and a carbon pesach itself can be invalidated if you think of another carbon gets invalidated if you think that it's a carbon pesach or a carbon chatas. Shimon Achi Azariah Omer. Shimon, his brother's name was Azariah, and Azariah would actually support and made a partnership with Shimon so that Shimon could be a Tana and learn. So he's always known in the Mishnayos, Shimon, not the name of his father, but Shimon, whose brother was Azariah. Azariah went to business and Shimon learned. He says, Shochton l'shem gavoya mehen kusherim. It's not so fast. If an oila is slaughtered for shlamim, according to the Tanakama, it's a valid carbon. But Rav Shimon says, no, if you slaughter it for something higher than it is, then it's kosher. L'shem namach mehem, but if you slaughter it for a carbon with saying that it's a carbon that's in a lower level than it is, then the carbon is invalidated. So let's say, Ketzad, let me give you an example. Koche kochim, let's say you have a koche kochim carbon, an oila, right? A goat that's going to be brought for an oila, female sheep, okay? Sheshachtam l'shem kochim kalam. But the person slaughtered it saying that he wants to make it into a shlamim. So then, pesulim, he made it puzzle, even if it's a regular carbon, because he's lowering the kedusha of that carbon. But kochi kalim, if it's a carbon shlamim, let's say, sheshachtim l'shem kochi kochim, if it's the reverse, if the kochi kalim, the shlamim, that you slaughtered it for a oila, kesherim, then it's a valid carbon. Ha-bachor v'hamasa, and even in kachim kalim, there are differences. Because we know kachim kalim, as I explained, is a shlamim, but then you have a bachor. The bachor that you give, the firstborn animal that you give as a gift to a kohen, is kachim kalim. He slaughters it in the base of Mikdash, and then he eats it at home. V'hamaser, or the 10th animal that was born that year, you give it as a gift to the kohen. So, or you give that as you have to bring it as a shlamim, and that's not the gift to the kohen, but you bring it as a carbon and you eat it at home. So these types of carbon kachim kalim, b'chorim masa, sheshachtim l'shteim shlamim, you slaughtered it thinking it's a regular shlamim, so you elevated it, kesherim, it's still then it's a kosher carbon. Shlamim sheshachtim l'shem b'chor l'shem maser, but if it's shlamim, you did the reverse. You slaughtered it for a b'chor or for maser, so you lowered it. It's a regular shlomim, but the person said, I want to shecht it for a bechor or maser. It's psulim, it's pasul. So I'm going to call up on the screen just to summarize the whole Mishnah. Mishnah has 4 opinions: Tanakama, Rab Lezer, Yossi ben Yochaini, and Shimon ben Azariah. So it depends. Every carbon that was shechted for not the right reasons. It was shechted not because of what it is. It's shechted as if it's a different carbon. So the Mishnah says, if it's a carbon, according to the Tanna Kama, a Pesach will always be pasul. It'll always be pasul. A chatas, if you shecht it for an oila, let's say, it would always be pasul. A asham that you shechted for an oila, so it's kosher. It's a kosher carbon, and even though you shechted it as it's an oila, but you continue as if it's an asham. So you sprinkle the blood like the halachas of an asham, and you eat it like the carbon asham. And other carbonas are certainly kosher. Let's say a carbon shlamim that you shechted it thinking or saying that it's an oila, so it still could be a kosher shlamim. Rabbi Lezer says he just adds one thing to the Tanakama. He says Pesach, Chatas, and Asham Apostle always right away, and other carbonis are kosher. So he just added the word Asham. Yossi ben Chayni says that he gives, if Pesach, Chatas, if you slaughter it, will always for a different intention, then it's possible right away. Other carbonis, he doesn't speak about Asham, but other carbonis, then he says that other carbonis, if you think that it's a carbon pesach, if you think that it's a carbon chatas, for example, you have an oila, and you think it's a carbon pesach or it's a carbon chatas, then it becomes invalidated. So it works the reverse. Shimon Azariah says, again, pesach chatas are always slaughtered. If you slaughter it, they become pasul right away. But it depends what you were thinking. If you thought it should become a elevated, more kedusha digga carbon, let's say a shlomim, you shlechted it for an oila, then it's still a kosher carbon. But if it's shlomim, if it's an oila, you shechted it for a shlomim, so you downgraded it, then even that carbon would become pasul. Okay, now the Gemara begins. Why does the Mishnah tell you that the bailim, if it's a kosher carbon, but the owner wasn't yaitze? For example, the owner brought an oila, and the kohen shechted it for shlamim. So why the Mishnah is to say that the bailim has to bring a new carbon oila? Why does the Mishnah say ela shaloi? It's teaching you a teaching. The owner was not yaitze, and he has to bring a new carbon. It still remains a holy carbon. You can't make a change anymore. You can't go on purposely say, oh, I shechted this oila for shlamim, so let me sprinkle the blood as if it's a shlamim. Let me think about when I'm carrying the blood that it's a shlamim. No. You made one mistake, you just continue as if you didn't make a mistake. The Amar Rava said, Oila sheshachta shloi lishma. Let's say you have a carbon oila, and you slaughtered it as a shlamim. Also, lizrei dama shloi lishma. You're not allowed to sprinkle the blood as if it's a shlamim. You have to think about when you sprinkle the blood that it's an oila. When you shechted it, you thought shlamim, but you have to correct yourself. Iba yasei masvara, iba yasei makra. This makes perfect sense logically, and I have a pasuk. Iba yasei masvara. Here's the logic. Mishum deshanebe kolhani lishanebe belezel. Once you made one mistake, you should continue to making more mistakes. If you and I don't even call it a mistake. If you did something on purpose and changed it from an oiler to a shlamim, should you now carry the blood and sprinkle the blood as if it's a shlamim? No, you should think about what it really is. It's really an oila. Just because you made a change doesn't mean you have to continue thinking that change. Iba is a mikra, but if you want, I can tell you it's a pasuk. Pasuk says, "Moitzis v'secha tishmar v'asisa kashnedart l'Hashem elekecha." Here's the pasuk on the screen. Here, the Torah tells you, watch what comes out of your mouth and do as your vow and the donation that you made, that you spoke with your mouth. First, it calls it a vow, V-O-W, and then it calls it a donation. Now, the difference between a neder and a dava is simple. A neder, you say, I vow to bring a carbon oil up. So when you make such a vow, if the oil is lost, you have to replace it. If you make a donation, you say this animal should be an oila. So then if the animal got lost, you don't have to, there's no insurance. You don't have to replace it. But here, the pasuk puts it in one pasuk. So hi nedava, why does the Torah change it from nedava back into the Gemara Amid Beis? Nederu, it's a vow. Ella, it teaches you like this. In Kamoshra Darta Sisa, if you followed through on what you said and you did everything perfectly, it's an oila, and you had all the four services you thought oila, hey neder, then you were yotza. Vim loy, but if you messed up, if the kohen messed up and purposely thought from an oila when he slaughtered it, he said, I'm going to say it's going to be a shlamim. So then nedava yehei, look at it as a donation. Unedava mishari lashnuyaba, and just because now it's a donation, are you allowed to continue changing it and changing it from what it's supposed to be? So the Torah tells you that no, continue making it into a kosher carbon just because you did one of the services thinking the wrong thoughts or saying the wrong thing. So because of that, therefore, that's the din that all karbanos that you slaughter for the wrong reasons, or you said for what it isn't, the owner was not yotzei, he didn't fulfill his vow, but the carbon is still kosher. Amalei Ravina, now a new topic. Amalei Ravina Rapapa. Ravina said to Rapapa, Lehavas Gabon beurta betchume beicharmach. You didn't come to the shul on Shabbos, and you didn't hear a good question. The Rami Rava Mili Mali Sa'adadi V'shanile. Rava asked a contradiction and answered it. My Mili Mal Yosa, what was this great question? So listen to this great question. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah. Kol Azvacham Shnizbehu L'Shloi Lishma. Any korban that you sacrifice, you slaughtered it for not its sake. Example, an oila, you slaughtered it for a shlamim. So then it's a kosher carbon. It's a kosher carbon, but the owner did not fulfill his commitment. It's only because you said that it should be a shlamim. Hostama, let's say you weren't thinking anything. Let's say the kohen who was slaughtering it, or the person that's slaughtering it, wasn't thinking anything. Then it's totally kosher. Only namil abaylam shem chayva. Alma, so we see stama kilshman dami. That if without thinking anything, that's as if you're shechting it kilishma for its sake, and therefore it's a totally 100% kosher. So not thinking anything and not saying anything is best. That's by karbonis or a minhu. But then I'll ask you a contradiction. Kol a get shenichtav shloi l'shem isha pasal. Any get that was written not for the sake of the woman, it's pasal. And we know the Brisa says ustama nami pasal. If you don't think anything, you just write rachel on the get, and you didn't think that it's for this rachel, it's also pasal. So why don't we say? We assume that you meant this rachel. Why is the get pasal? And by the carbon, we say it's kosher. An anonymous is kosher. Ushani is a very simple answer. Zvachim, when somebody brings a carbon, so it's an oila. Bistam l'shman oimdim. So without thinking, it's definitely going to be brought for its sake because the owner brought it as an oila, and the slaughterer is going to think whatever it is I'm slaughtering it for. So because the animal was brought as a carbon, somebody brought him an animal, so he knows that he's the slaughterer in the base of Hamikdash, so he's slaughtering it to be a kosher carbon. Isha b'stoma lav legerishon. When a woman shows up at the sofer's house, we don't know if she's set up to be divorced. So when the sofer, the scribe, does not think of this woman when he's writing the get is invalid. Says the Gemara, 1 point. How do you know that if you don't think anything by a carbon, it's kosher? B'nolan. How do you know that? Ilema, the Gemara is going to bring Mishnayos that are going to show it, and the Gemara is going to say, finally, there's an open Mishnah that says that idea. So we'll go quickly. Ilema b'hadetanan kol hazvacha shnizbechu shlei l'shmam v'loy kotanu shlei l'shmam shmam. The Mishnah says that the only thing that invalidates a carbon is if you say that it could be shechted for it's not its sake. So, but the Mishnah doesn't say any carbon that was not slaughtered for its sake. So, therefore, it implies that only if you explicitly say the wrong carbon, that's when it's invalid. But if you don't say anything, then it is good. So that's by carbon. So the Gemara says, if that's your inference, gabeget name, haktani, the Mishnah says by gittin, kol a get shenichtav shloi l'shem isha pasal. The only time a get is pasal if you write it not for this woman. So, but v'leikutani shalichtav shem isha pasal. If it doesn't say that if it wasn't written for any woman, it's pasal. So you could also make that inference by get that if you're not thinking anything, it's kosher. But the truth is, we know that if you're not thinking anything, it's a pasal get. And by carbon, if you're not thinking anything, it's kosher carbon. You see it from here. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Keitzad l'shmam v'shloi l'shmam. Sometimes you think it right, and then you mess up. Then it's messed up. First, you think it's right. Let's say a guy brings a carbon Pesach, right? It's the 14th. So it was slaughtered l'shem Pesach, and then l'shem shlamim, and then let's say they caught the blood and they started saying, I'm catching the blood, this is a shlamim. So then that's a case. So that's no good. Time of the Omer l'shem Pesach l'shem shlamim. It's only because you said shem Pesach, kosher, thought, and shem shlamim, a non-kosher thought. Hol l'shem Pesach ustama, if you said that it's l'shem Pesach, and then by the second service you didn't think anything, it's kosher. Almost, so we see stomach lishmandami. By not thinking anything, that's as if you're thinking the right thought. So the Gemara says nilma shana hasam. That could be different. Dama kala oisal das rishonu oisa. Since your first thought was Pesach, the reason why it's kosher over there, if you don't think anything by the second service, is because by the first service, by the slaughtering, you were thinking correct. So if you're going to do another service, even if you don't think anything, we always assume that you're relying on your first thought, which was the correct thought, by the first service. Let's bring it from here. The Mishnah says that sometimes you have a service that you do not for its sake, and then you do it for its sake. You get the first service wrong, and then second service correct. It's a carbon Pesach, and you said l'shem shlamim, you're slaughtering it l'shem shlamim, and then you sprinkle, and then you're catching the blood l'shem Pesach. Tamadam l'shem shama l'shem Pesach. That's why it's not kosher. Hastama, but if you started off with an anonymous thought, and then you said l'shem Pesach, then it's a kosher carbon. So we see that an anonymous thought is a kosher thought. So the Gemara says, no, Dilma Shana Hasan, that could be different. The fact by the second service you got it right, Shem Pesach, so if you didn't think any thought by the first service, it's also kosher. But how do I know by the first service? By slaughtering. If you're not thinking anything, it's still going to be a kosher carbon. So do you have no proof from over there? And here's the Gemara is clearly going to give you a clear Mishnah that says that if you're not thinking anything, it's good. From this brisa, it says over here, l'shem shisha dvarim hazevach nizbah. For 6 things you have to think in your mind when you slaughter an animal. L'shem zevach, you have to get what the carbon is. L'shem zaveach, you got to get who the owner is. L'shem Hashem, you have to slaughter it as to God. L'shem Ishim, to bring it onto the you want to bring it onto the mizbeach. Not that you're gonna roast it and eat it. L'shem reach, you want to not roast it first and then bring it onto the mizbeach. Burn it first because it has to be raw when it's brought onto the mizbeach, so you can have a good smell. L'shem ne'echayach, you want to do a pleasantry to God, make God happy. And if it's a chatas and asham, l'shem chet, you have to have in mind what avera you're shechting this animal for. So that's the Tanakama. Amar Rabbi Yosi says, Af mi, and here's the point. Af mi shaloi hoye belibo l'shem achas meke'ela. Anybody who wasn't thinking about all these thoughts, the animal, as long as he wasn't thinking or saying an opposite thought, kosher, the animal's kosher. Shetnai bezdin hu. That's a condition of bezdin, that even if you don't think correctly, and you shouldn't even say it because you might mess up. Don't think anything. That's the condition of bezdin that made it kosher. So the Gemara concludes, Isalka da asnu bezdin de loyleim lishma. Bezdin said that person shouldn't say I'm shechting it for its sake. Dilma asin l'meimash loy lishma. You might mess it up. Don't think anything. Isalka daita stama puzzle. If you want to say it, not thinking anything is puzzle. Kaimu bezdin umasnu milsa dem afsabe. Can bezdin make a takana that you shouldn't think anything, and that's a kosher carbon? So it's understood that everybody knew that even if you're not thinking anything, it is a kosher carbon. So tomorrow we're going to discuss how is it that by a get, if you don't think anything, it's not a kosher get. So we'll do that tomorrow.